Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Today I was online and I came across an article on the Roots about Snoop Dogg and Roots. Apparently, Snoop Dogg is not feeling Roots, the miniseries. And for those of you, the few of you who don't know what Roots is about, it's about slavery, it's about Jim Crow. It chronicles the family history of Alex Haley. Alex Haley was a famous author. He wrote the Roots novel, and he also helped write the autobiography of Malcolm X. So Roots is about his family story. And I know that there's controversy about whether or not it was factual or whether or not it was historically accurate. And I won't go into those issues for the purposes of this video. I will just point out that it's a story about slavery. It's a story about his family's history. So Snoop Dogg basically said that he's tired of seeing black people beat down. He's tired of slave movies, and he wants to hear more about our accomplishments as a people. He wants to see more movies about our successes as a people. And I just want to take time to talk about Snoop Dogg's comment and just share my thoughts about it. First of all, I'll say that he is correct in a sense. He's correct about how we need to see more films about our accomplishments as a people. We need more stories about our successes. We need stories about African kings and queens. We need stories about African inventors, African conquerors, African architects, African scientists, African mathematicians, African statesmen. We need positive stories about black people, not just in America, but worldwide. So I agree with him on that. I definitely agree with that. We need more positive images on television and in movies. When we look at television today, all we see is a lot of negativity. There are only a few decent programs about African American people on television. The majority is a lot of negativity, a lot of debauchery, a lot of stories that promote and perpetuate negative stereotypes about black people. So I hear what this brother is saying. And also, I want to say this. I'm glad that this brother has apparently taken on a new consciousness, a new concern about his community. I've seen images of him at the Million Man March, the Justice or Else March. I see that he spoke out on the Oscars issue, and he's been talking about issues of racism in this country. And I commend that brother for making those steps towards evolution and progress in his life. And I commend the brother for making a step towards consciousness. Because as long as we are still breathing, there is still hope for each and every one of us. There's a potential for us to awaken from this deep slumber. So I commend him for that. But I just hope that the brother takes time to reflect on his own contribution to the negativity that he condemns. This brother was a part of a label that promoted gang violence, that promoted drug dealing, that promoted the degradation of women. So I just hope that the brother takes that into account as he points the finger at Roots and other things that he views as negative or not uplifting. I just hope that he takes time to reflect and to evaluate himself as well as others. So yes, he is correct that we need to have more positive images about our accomplishments and our successes. Because too often, when Hollywood does depict African kings and queens, those African kings and queens are painted white. We've seen the gods of Egypt. We've seen Exodus. We've seen the Ten Commandments. We've seen movies about Cleopatra and all these other movies about African kings in Kemet. They always depict them as white because they can't identify black people with accomplishment. They can't identify black people with advancement. They assume that someone non-black created those civilizations. So they perpetuate this idea that anything great that came out of Africa was created by white people. They perpetuate this myth of white supremacy. So I feel what this brother is saying when he condemns Hollywood for not depicting our successes. But at the same time, I will say this. We can't forget our history. We can't gloss over our history, including our history of slavery. By doing so, we do a great disservice to our ancestors who died during the Middle Passage, millions of them. Those ancestors who rest at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. We do them a grave disservice when we want to forget slavery, when we want to forget that original sin of this country. We do an injustice to those who were beaten by the slave master, to those who were whipped by the slave master, killed by the slave master, castrated by the slave master, branded by the slave master, raped by the slave master. We do them a grave injustice by forgetting the pain that they endured. No other people do this kind of thing. The Jews remember the Holocaust. They tell the world, never forget. No matter where in the world they are, they make sure that the world remembers the Holocaust. They have done countless movies about the Holocaust and about World War II so that you will never forget about their suffering. And in fact, these people, the Jews, they fought for reparations, compensation, and they fought for justice. To this very day, they track down those who participated in the Holocaust. They track them down and they bring them to justice. But African Americans, the black man in America, too often we want to forgive and forget. Instead of demanding justice, we view reparations. Many of our people view reparations as some kind of fantasy, as something that's unrealistic, even though there are countless examples of people who have fought for reparations and received reparations. We need to demand justice just like the Jews demand justice. We need to demand that no one forget our suffering just like the Jews do. And we look at the example of Pearl Harbor. We're taught to never forget that. We are taught about Pearl Harbor in history class and on television. They have movies about Pearl Harbor. Did the Americans forget about Pearl Harbor? Of course not. They remember Pearl Harbor to this day. And they made sure that the people responsible for Pearl Harbor paid dearly. They dropped a nuclear bomb on them, killing thousands of them. And recently, the president marked the anniversary of that bombing by visiting Japan. But they demand justice. They took action against those who had wronged them. But us, we want to forgive and forget. We want to forget about the suffering that our people experienced here in America, that our ancestors experienced. when those planes went into the World Trade Center, killing close to, or a little bit more than 3,000 people. America said never again. They said never forget. And they went after terrorists and even people that weren't terrorists. They invaded 2 countries and dropped bombs on all kinds of people, terrorists and non-terrorists alike, innocent and guilty alike. They killed babies, women and children without mercy. They saw justice, what they perceived as justice. And they said never again, and we will never forget. But when it comes to the African in America, the attitude is forget about it, get over it, it's over and done with. There's no demand for justice for the crime, one of the greatest crimes against humanity, the slave trade. And that's a damn shame. We need to tell our story. We need to understand that slavery was not that long ago. It was only 150 years ago. There are people that are living today whose great-grandparents were slaves, and even some of them whose grandparents were slaves. That is not that long ago. And we have to understand that Jim Crow is the legacy of slavery. And Jim Crow only ended about 50 years ago. Many of our parents and grandparents lived during Jim Crow. They saw the signs that said no coloreds. They saw the whites only fountains and the colored fountains. They literally were forced to sit in the back of the bus. Many of them witnessed lynchings. They saw the Klansmen lighting cross. They experienced that. Many of them either witnessed or experienced dogs biting into their flesh. Many of them were blasted with fire hoses. People that are living today. Many of them lived during a time when it was illegal for a black person to actually vote, when a black person was subjected to poll taxes, literacy tests, and when a black person could be lynched simply for trying to exercise their right to vote or simply for whistling at a white girl. A time when black people could be lynched with impunity and black people were burned at the stake and all kinds of barbaric acts were committed against us. That wasn't that long ago. So we cannot just brush all of that painful history aside and say, forget about it. We don't want to see it. When all these other people make sure that the world remembers what they have gone through. They tell their story in the history books. They tell their story in film, in song, in poetry, and it's time for us to tell our story. It's time for us to continue to tell our story, not only our story of slavery, our story of Jim Crow, our story of struggle, but also our story of accomplishment. We have to tell that story as well. We cannot sit around waiting for some benevolent white man to be so kind as to tell our story. We have to be the ones to tell our story and pass it on to the next generation to make the world feel our pain and know about our accomplishments. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.